Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's lecture, we continue our study of monopoly by examining how a monopolist actually makes business decisions. In the previous lecture, we discussed why monopolies exist and how barriers to entry allow one firm to dominate a market. Today, we move to the next important question. Once a monopoly exists, how does the firm choose the level of output? What price does it charge, and how much profit can it earn? Unlike perfectly competitive firms, monopolies have market power. This means they are not forced to accept the market price. Instead, they can choose output and then charge the price consumers are willing to pay based on market demand. Before we analyze monopoly behavior, let's compare perfect competition and monopoly. In perfect competition, there are many firms selling identical products. Because there are many competitors, each firm is a price taker. The competitive firm follows the rule. Marginal revenue equals price equals marginal cost. There is also free entry and exit. In the long run, profits attract new firms, and losses cause firms to leave. As a result, long-run equilibrium occurs where price equals average cost. Now compare that with monopoly. A monopoly has one firm and no closed substitute product. Because the monopolist is the only seller, it becomes a price setter. The monopolist still uses the rule marginal revenue equals marginal cost. However, unlike perfect competition, price is not equal to marginal revenue. Also, barriers to entry prevent competitors from entering, allowing monopoly profits to persist. Now let's begin with demand curves. Monopolies can charge different prices for each product, but it is still constrained by demand. Consumers decide how much to buy at each price. So even though the monopolist has market power, it cannot charge any price it wants without consequences. Because the monopolist is the only seller in the market, the firm's demand curve is the same as the market demand curve. This is a major difference from perfect competition, where an individual firm faces only a small part of the market. So when we analyze monopoly, the firm must always consider the downward sloping demand curve faced by the entire market. Now let's review the competitive firm. A perfectly competitive firm faces a flat horizontal demand curve. Why is the demand curve flat? Because the market determines the price through industry demand and supply. The, the individual firm is too small to influence that price. If the price, if the market price is P, the firm can sell a small quantity QL or a large quantity QH at exactly the same price. The firm cannot charge more than P because buyers would purchase from competitors. The firm also has no reason to charge less than P because it can let it sell at the market price. So the competitive firm chooses quantity, but price remains fixed. Now compare that with monopoly. A monopoly faces the entire market demand curve, which is usually downward sloping. This means if the monopolist wants to sell a higher quantity, such as QH, it must lower the price to PL. If the monopolist wants to charge a higher price PH, then consumers will buy only a smaller quantity QL. So the monopolist faces a trade-off between price and quantity. Let's look at the table. As output increases, total cost generally rises. At the same time, total revenue changes in an interesting way. Because demand is downward sloping, the monopolist can sell more output only by lowering price. For example, to sell one unit, the price is $1,200. To sell 5 units, price falls to $800. This means quantity rises but price falls. Now look at profit, which equals profit equals total revenue minus total cost. From the table, the highest profit occurs at quantity of 4 or 5, where profit equals $2,350. This suggests that producing too little reduces revenue, while producing too much increases cost and lowers price too much. Now let's interpret this graphically. For monopolists, total revenue first rises and then eventually falls. At low levels of output, total revenue is small because quantity sold is small. At high levels of output, quantity is large, but price becomes much lower, so revenue may stop rising or even decline. Meanwhile, total cost continues rising as output increases. This creates a profit maximizing region where total revenue is farthest above the total cost. Profit is the greatest where the vertical distance between total revenue and total cost is the largest. That point represents the maximum profit. Notice something important that the quantity that maximizes revenue is not always the quantity that maximizes profit. Why? Because profit depends on both revenue and cost. A firm that focuses only on revenue may produce too much and ignore the rising cost. So firms maximize profit, not revenue. Now let's introduce a more practical decision method. In the real world, monopolists may not know their full total revenue and total cost curves for sure. However, they often understand how small changes in output affect revenue and cost. This leads to two key concepts. Marginal revenue is the additional revenue from selling one more unit. Marginal cost is the additional cost of producing one more unit. A monopolist determines the best output level by comparing marginal revenue and marginal cost. Now let's calculate marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is changes in total revenue divided by change in quantity. From quantity 0 to 1, marginal revenue equals 1,200 minus 0 divided by 1 minus 0 equals 1,200. From quantity 1 to 2 is marginal revenue equals 2,200 minus 1,200 divided by 1 equals 1,000. Then it falls to 800, 600, 400, and so on. And this shows an important pattern. Marginal revenue decreases as output increases. Eventually, selling more output can reduce total revenue. Now let's calculate marginal cost. Marginal cost is change in total cost divided by change in quantity. From quantity 0 to 1, and marginal cost equals 500 by 0 divided by 1 equals 500. Then marginal cost becomes 275, 225, and so on. Marginal cost rises sharply at higher output levels. This reflects diminishing returns and increasing production difficulty. Now compare MR and MC. At quantity 5, MR equals 400. MC equals 400. This is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So the monopolists maximize profit by producing 5 units. This matches the earlier profit table. So the MR equals MC rule confirms the best output choice. Graphically, the monopolist chooses the quantity where MR intersects MC. That quantity is 5. Then the monopolist goes up to the demand curve to find the price consumers will pay for 5 units. At quantity 5, the price is $800. So the monopolist sells 5 units at a price of $800. If the monopolist produces fewer than 5 units, then marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. This means producing one more unit adds more revenue than cost. So the firm can increase profit by expanding output. If the monopolist produces more than 5 units, then marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue. Now, extra units cost more than the revenue they bring. So the firm can increase profit by reducing output. This is why MR equal MC is the profit maximizing rule. For monopolists, marginal revenue is always less than price. Why? Because to sell one more unit, the monopolist must lower the price. But the lower price applies not only to the new unit, but also to all previous units sold. So the firm gains revenue from the extra unit, but losses some revenues on earlier units due to the lower price. Because of this, marginal unit lies below the demand curve. Both curves share the same intercept, but marginal revenue falls faster than demand. Now let's summarize the practical method economists use to determine monopoly price and output. There are 3 steps. Step 1 is to determine the profit maximizing level of output using the rule. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Step 2 is to decide what price to charge by using the demand curve. Once the firm knows the profit maximizing quantity, it looks at the demand curve to find the highest price consumers will pay for that quantity. Step 3 is to calculate total revenue, total cost, and profit using the rectangle areas on the graph. This 3-step method is one of the most important tools for understanding monopoly behavior. Now let's focus on the first step. The monopolist begins by comparing marginal revenue and marginal cost. As long as marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, producing more units adds to profit. As long as marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue, producing more units reduces profit. Therefore, the optimal quantity occurs exactly where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In this graph, that output level is labeled Q1. This is a monopolist profit maximizing quantity. So the first decision the monopolist makes is not price, it is quantity. Now that the monopolist has chosen quantity Q1, the next step is to determine the selling price. To do this, move vertically upward from Q1 until reaching the demand curve. The demand curve shows the price consumers are willing to pay for that amount of output. That price is labeled P1. So after choosing quantity Q1, the monopolist charges price P1. Now let's complete the analysis by calculating profit. First, total revenue equals price multiplied by quantity. So total revenue is P1 times Q1. This is shown by the large rectangle from the origin up to price P1 and across the quantity Q1. Next, total cost equals average cost multiplied by quantity. At quantity Q1, we move up to the average cost curve. That cost level is labeled P2. So total cost is P2 times Q1. This smaller rectangle represents the firm's total production cost. Now subtract total cost from total revenue. The shaded region between P1 and P2 across quantity Q1 represent monopoly profit. Now let's discuss efficiency. Allocative efficiency occurs when society receives the optimal quantity of output where price equals marginal cost. Perfect competition produces at this level, but monopoly restricts output and charges a higher price. Because of this, monopoly creates allocative inefficiency. Consumers buy less than the socially optimal quantity. Society loses some potential benefit. This is one of the main criticisms of monopoly. Thank you for watching.